I've chosen Glendalough in Ireland as a place I visit about 9 times a year to escape and get closer to nature. It's a very spiritual place for me and my family. And I'm comparing it to Koyasan in Japan, which is the earliest Buddhist temple in Japan. Both of them of about a similar age. Glendalough, St. Kevin's monastery, established in 6th century, and Koyasan established in the 8th century. Kobodaishi was the founder and brought Buddhism from China to Japan, and established a very isolated monastery up in the mountains and in the forests. And similarly, St. Kevin became a hermit in the Wicklow Mountains in Glendalough Valley, again, a wooded and very isolated place originally. These are the similarities. They're both monastic sites established around the same time, but the particular differences that I've discovered, just a little context map. Koyasan, quite a busy town now because it gets so many tourists, and this is one of the key differences, that there's a sort of a real life that's built up around, in and around the temples. There are over 115 temples, so it's a very active monastery in a way that Glendalough isn't anymore. It still gets pilgrims, both of them get pilgrims, but it's a sort of historic archaeological site, more than a sort of active spiritual one. So that's probably one of the main differences. Also, one of the sort of fundamental differences that I discovered is kind of to do with material use of materials, and there's a permanence to this, the stone constructions at Glendalough, and yet they've fallen into disrepair through attack over the years from Vikings, Irish tribes, pre-Christian Irish tribes, Norman, Anglo-Norman church, and then it was burnt to the ground, I think, during the dissolution. So quite a violent history. So these sort of permanent stone edifices that suggest permanence, and actually the reality is that they're not permanent at all. And in contrast, what's quite extraordinary is that Koyasan, I focused on Garan, which is the oldest part of the temple complex, the oldest part of the monastery. What I discovered was that there's a tradition in Japan of constant renewal, which links quite beautifully to Buddhism philosophy. And I'm talking about it very superficially because I need to learn more about it. But they rebuild their buildings. So even if it's the oldest building, it's not necessarily the original one. It's been rebuilt. So every 20 years or so, those same crafts are handed down. So there's this sort of constant renewal and rebirth, and an acceptance that things change and constantly change and evolve. And yet that acceptance in the Japanese way of thinking has made this site seem more permanent. And so it's that I find particularly fascinating, as the differences between those sort of philosophies, and Japanese sort of awareness of vulnerability to earthquakes, forest fires, tsunamis. This sort of this strong awareness of their vulnerability makes them actually far more resilient, and they've come up with a strategy for adapting by reconstructing things and making sure those traditions are passed down in a way that doesn't exist in Glendalough. So it's quite a fascinating contrast, and that's my main difference for today. Thank you.